Every industry has a moment when the old rules stop working. But that moment rarely announces itself. In boating, it is showing up in places most people are not watching. On fuel receipts, at launch ramps, in the hush of early morning coves where engines used to shake the water. Electric outboards were never expected to challenge gasoline this quickly, yet here they are, reshaping expectations in all the small ways that add up over seasons. To understand why this shift is accelerating, and why it matters long before you buy your next motor, we need to start at the beginning of the story you were never shown. The shortcut electric took that gasoline never could. The shortcut electric took that gasoline never could. A gasoline outboard is a miracle of compact engineering, but it is also a tightly packed stack of problems waiting to happen. Inside the cowl are pistons, connecting rods, crankshafts, valves, camshafts, oil pumps, fuel pumps, water pumps, thermostats, gaskets, injector tips, or carburetor jets, ignition coils, spark plugs, and a gearbox full of gears and bearings that all need to live in perfect balance. Heat from combustion fights coolant flow. Vibration works against every fastener. Corrosion looks for weak points in castings and passages. The entire system is complex, because turning an explosion into smooth thrust is, at its core, a complicated job. Electric outboards skipped that job entirely. Instead of trying to tame combustion, they start with a sealed electric motor designed to spin quietly and efficiently for thousands of hours. There is no carburetor to clog, no fuel rail to rust from inside, no lubricating oil that must be changed every season. In many electric designs, the motor and gearbox are a single sealed unit with far fewer moving parts than a comparable gasoline engine. The most delicate components are not bathed in fuel and exhaust. They are tucked inside housings kept dry by design. That shortcut does not mean electric outboards are cheap toys. The research and development behind motor control electronics, waterproof connectors, safe battery chemistry, and thermal management is substantial. But the day-to-day reality for the owner is that the system has fewer ways to fail. The interesting part is not simply that electric outboards are simpler. It is what that simplicity allows manufacturers to ignore, and where that saved complexity shows up on your own ledger of boating costs over the years ahead. The first weekends when electricity feels almost suspiciously easy. If you have ever fought a reluctant gasoline outboard at a launch ramp, the first interaction with a decent electric can feel like cheating. You bolt it to the transom, connect the battery leads or slide in a purpose-built pack, check the safety lanyard, and turn a throttle. There is no choke to set, no priming bulb to squeeze, no ritual of pulling a starter cord and hoping the engine will cooperate. There is a quiet hum, a gentle push, and the hull begins to move. The most common doubt does not arrive at the dock. It arrives in your head. How far will this really go? How much battery is enough? What happens if I run out of charge halfway across the lake and the wind comes up? Those are fair questions, but they are usually asked without an honest look at how most boats are actually used. On many inland lakes and protected rivers, a significant share of boats do not travel vast distances. They putter from dock to cove, from ramp to fishing spot, from campsite to swimming area. A big day may mean a handful of short runs separated by long stretches of drifting, anchoring, or slow trolling. The engine spends more time waiting than working. For that pattern, electric range begins to look different. You charge overnight from shore power. You use a small portion of the battery in a morning of casual runs. You charge again while you are ashore eating and talking. The sensation of limited range turns into something closer to the way we already treat phones and laptops. Plug in when you are not using them, and they are ready when you are. That early ease can be seductive. You find yourself noticing the lack of fumes in the stern. You realize you no longer smell like gasoline when you step off the dock. You are not planning detours to the fuel dock or lifting jerry cans in and out of a truck bed. The days feel smoother. It is easy at that point to assume the story ends there. It does not. The real difference appears when you look beyond first impressions and start tracing the small, repeated costs that gasoline engines quietly attach to every season of ownership. What you are really paying for when you run on gasoline. When boaters compare electric and gasoline outboards, the conversation usually stops at the most obvious invoice: the purchase price. A gasoline outboard in a certain horsepower range may still be less expensive upfront than an electric outboard, plus a quality battery bank. At a glance, that is a clear win for gasoline. But that is only the first page of the bill. A gasoline engine keeps collecting, in smaller, more forgettable slips. There is fuel, which rarely becomes cheaper over long stretches of time and can rise abruptly. If you prefer ethanol-free gasoline to protect hoses and prevent phase separation, you already know what that pump price looks like. There are oil changes for four-stroke engines, which add up quietly when you follow the hours recommended in the manual. There are fuel filters and water-separating filters that should be replaced before they clog and strand you. Carbureted engines, especially those that sit unused between outings, grow varnish and sediment inside the tiny passages that meters fuel. Injected engines may avoid some of that, but they carry their own sensitivity to poor fuel quality and contamination. Somewhere around a second or third season, many gasoline outboard owners pay a shop to get it running right again, and that bill can be surprisingly close to the cost of a good weekend trip. Then, there is winterizing for those who store their boats in cold climates. Fogging oil, fuel stabilizer, draining, flushing, shrink wrapping, or covering. Each step may be modest, but none of them are free. Skip enough of those, and the engine will eventually collect its penalty with interest. None of this is scandalous. It is simply how combustion engines live. The reason it often goes unnoticed in comparisons is that the costs are fragmented. An extra container of oil here, a surprise fuel pump there, a mid-season impeller replacement, because the old one finally lost a vane. You do not add them all together in your head. The larger cost sits in the background, the day the engine refuses to start when you have family and visiting, or paying customers waiting at the dock, or a narrow weather window you needed to hit. That day is paid in lost time rather than cash, and it almost never shows up in brochures. Electric outboards cannot make those fuel and maintenance expenses disappear from the past. They can stop you from adding new ones to the stack. If this part of the story raises questions about your own boat, your routes, your charging options, or whether an electric setup actually makes sense for the way you run, drop those in the comments. I pull upcoming chapters straight from the questions you ask. And if you want more breakdowns that cut through marketing and focus on real-world ownership, tap like and subscribe. It tells the platform this is worth showing to other boaters facing the same choices. And it keeps you in the loop as we follow where this shift is actually heading. What electric quietly deletes from your future budget? A competent electric outboard is not free to own, but the list of things it asks you to buy and do is surprisingly short. There is no gasoline bill. You pay for electricity, which is usually much cheaper per unit of energy delivered to the propeller than fuel, especially if you charge at home from a standard outlet or a reasonably priced marina connection. If your boat lives near solar panels on a dock roof or at a mooring where a small solar array can top up the bank, some portion of that operating cost may flatten further. There is no engine oil to change. The motor is sealed and lubricated from the factory. You are not buying bottles of oil at the beginning of each season or paying someone else to dispose of the old fluid. There is no carburetor to clean, no fuel injectors to service because of varnished gasoline, no fuel filters to change. The entire fuel system, with all its opportunities for neglect and contamination, has been removed from the equation. In many service schedules for electric outboards, the recommended owner tasks look like this. Inspect the propeller for fishing line and damage. Keep electrical connections clean and protected. Check sacrificial anodes. Follow battery storage and charging guidelines. The deeper maintenance, when it is needed, happens in long intervals and often consists of checks rather than replacements. Financially, it changes the slope of the cost graph. Electric asks for more upfront. Each season after that, the cost line stays relatively flat, rising gently with electricity prices and any eventual battery service. Gasoline often starts lower, then climbs in a jagged stair-step pattern as you add fuel, parts, and labor year after year. Over 5 or 10 years of regular use on inland waters, where range demands are modest and shore power is available, the quiet erasure of those recurring gasoline costs is what makes electric not just nicer, but genuinely cheaper in the ways that matter when you finally total everything up. And as those yearly totals shift, something else changes too. The feeling of what it means to spend a day on the water in the first place. Noise, vibration, and the way a motor shapes every hour on board. Most boaters remember the first time they pushed a throttle forward and felt a hull lift. The sound of a gasoline outboard is tied to that memory as tightly as the smell of two-stroke exhaust on a cold morning. That nostalgia hides a simple truth. Gasoline outboards are inherently rough. Even well-balanced four-stroke engines send pulses through the hull. They idle with a small but constant shake. At medium throttle, they drone. At wide open throttle, they shout. Your hand on the tiller, your knees against the seat, your ears beneath a brim, all learn to live with that. Electric outboards change that baseline. At idle speeds, many are nearly silent. You hear the whisper of the propeller in water, the creak of the boat itself, the conversation at the bow. At cruising speeds, the dominant sounds are hull and wake. Vibration is minimal because the motor delivers torque as a smooth, continuous rotation rather than a rapid series of small explosions being tamed by flywheels and mounts. For a parent teaching children to fish, that calm is not abstract. It affects how long smaller hands want to stay out. For a guide who specializes in quiet stalking for wary species, it can be the difference between spooking fish and slipping into a spot unnoticed. For someone whose hearing is already strained from years of engines and tools, the absence of roar is a health choice as much as a comfort one. Mechanically, that calm has its own consequences. Fewer vibrations means less fatigue on fasteners, mounting brackets, and electronics. The chart plotter at the console, the small trolling motor up front, the lights on an arch. All of them live in a gentler environment when the main motor is not shaking the transom every second it runs. It is not that gasoline engines are incapable of refinement. Premium models can be impressively smooth and quiet. But to get there, manufacturers have added more complex mounts, more intricate exhaust routing, and more sound-deadening material inside the cowling, each of which adds cost and things that can fail. Electric arrived at that calm by starting from a fundamentally different physical process. The question is not whether that feels better. It is what you are willing to trade away in range, and refueling convenience to get it, and how much those trade-offs actually matter for the way you use your boat. Where gasoline still wins, and why that matters less for some owners than others. If this were a simple story about silence and maintenance, gasoline would already be a relic. It is not. Gasoline outboards still dominate in places where energy density and refuel speed matter more than anything else. If you run offshore charters that cover long distances at high speeds, the ability to carry large tanks of fuel and refill them in minutes is not negotiable. If you operate in remote coastal areas where there is diesel and gasoline at a small dock, but no reliable shore power, an electric outboard that needs hours of charging between uses is a liability, no matter how efficient it might be on paper. In commercial fishing, where time on the grounds is tied directly to income, a motor that can be refueled in a few minutes without plugging into anything is still the rational choice for many hulls. For larger displacement boats, set up as floating homes or RVs on water, hybrid systems that combine generators with electric drives may eventually change that balance. But they are more complex than a simple outboard swap. Range is where battery chemistry still makes its limits known. To carry the same usable energy as a tank of gasoline, a battery must be larger, heavier, and more expensive. For modest power and modest distances, this trade is acceptable. For high power and long distances, it quickly becomes awkward. The important distinction is that a large share of recreational boaters are not living at those extremes. Their boats live on small to medium lakes. Their typical day involves a few short trips rather than one long high-speed run. They dock where power is easy to reach, or they trailer home to driveways that already have outlets. For them, the places where gasoline is undeniably better are places they rarely go. When you separate what is technically possible from what actually happens on most weekends, the advantage line moves. Gasoline retains clear dominance in blue water and heavy commercial roles. Electric quietly accumulates wins in the quiet, everyday waters where most hulls spend their lives. Those quiet wins, however, are not happening in a vacuum. They are unfolding under rules that are still being written. Rules, marinas, and the slow push that favors silence. It is easy to imagine boating as one of the last places where rules move slowly. A corner of life, still governed by tradition, rather than regulation. But that separation is thinning. Quietly, year after year, the same forces that reshaped road vehicles, lawn tools, and even small generators are beginning to touch the water. The changes are subtle at first, almost unremarkable, but they are steering the future in a direction many boaters do not fully see coming. On certain drinking water reservoirs, gasoline engines are not just discouraged, they are banned outright. The logic is straightforward. Millions of people rely on those lakes for their water, and even a small amount of unburned fuel or a minor spill can travel far in still water. Elsewhere, the restrictions are more selective. Older carbureted two-stroke engines, the kind that release a significant portion of unburned mixture directly into the lake, have been phased out or blocked from new permits. Modern four-stroke gasoline engines and electric motors remain allowed, not because of marketing pressure, but because they meet basic environmental thresholds that regulators consider manageable. Urban lakes introduce a different kind of constraint. Noise ordinances written for parks and neighborhoods end up affecting the water as well. A mid-range gasoline outboard, even when operated responsibly, can echo across a basin and exceed decibel limits written with joggers and picnickers in mind. Electric outboards, with their near-silent operation, fit effortlessly inside those limits. The rules do not explicitly promote electric propulsion, but in practice, they tilt the playing field. Even in places without formal restrictions, marinas and campgrounds often shape behavior through simple preferences. A family-oriented marina might request low-noise operation after evening hours. A lakeside campground might favor electric rentals for guests who paddle, swim, or fish near shore. Some communities even reserve prime mooring spots for low-impact vessels. These are not rigid mandates. They are gentle, voluntary pressures that favor clean, quiet power. Behind these local choices stand wider forces with longer timelines. Air quality agencies track emissions from recreational engines. Water quality departments monitor contaminants in sediments. Harbor communities field complaints from residents when fumes drift through waterfront homes on busy weekends. Insurance carriers evaluate risk profiles and notice patterns in accident reports involving fuel handling and dockside fires. Electric outboards align neatly with those concerns. They release no exhaust at the point of use. There are no carburetor leaks, no cracked fuel lines, no chance of spilling gasoline while refilling a portable tank on a rocking dock. The hazards they do carry, electrical, thermal, or chemical, are largely internal and addressed through enclosure, management systems, and certification processes that regulators increasingly trust. For now, the advantages show up as nudges rather than commands. A few charging pedestals added at a marina, a reduced launch fee for zero-emission craft, a pilot program allowing electric-only access to certain coves during early morning hours. None of these measures dominate the rulebook, but together they reveal a direction. Gasoline outboards are not facing extinction. They remain essential for offshore work, remote regions, and high-demand roles where rapid refueling and high-energy density are non-negotiable. But for the everyday inland boater, the slow policy drift is already reshaping what convenient means. When you choose to invest in another decade of gasoline or step into electric, you are not simply choosing a motor. You are choosing which side of that drift you prefer to stand on as the water around you changes. Batteries, resale, and the price every motor eventually demands. Even the most well-built motor will eventually ask you to pay the rest of its price. The way it asks is different for gasoline and electric. A gasoline outboard ages in ways most boaters recognize. Compression drops as rings and cylinder walls wear. Corrosion creeps into cooling passages and around fasteners. Electrical connections oxidize. Sensors and modules fall out of their ideal ranges. With time, starting becomes less certain, fuel consumption creeps upward, and smoke on a cold morning becomes a familiar sight. When it comes time to sell, a decade-old gasoline outboard with unknown hours and fragmentary maintenance records is a hard proposition. Buyers mentally assign a discount for every question mark. They assume, often correctly, that major components are closer to the end than the beginning of their lives. On many smaller boats, the outboard becomes the limiting factor that drags down the entire package's value. Electric outboards do not escape aging, but the pattern is different. The motor itself, if designed and built well, can deliver nearly the same torque and smoothness thousands of hours into its life as it did on the first day. There are no rings to lose tension, no valves to recede into seats, no internal combustion byproducts to coat everything in residue. Wear happens in bearings and seals, which can be managed and replaced on long intervals. The component that raises the most questions in buyers' minds is the battery. Batteries lose capacity with cycles and time. Eventually, they need replacement. The cost of that replacement is not trivial. But unlike an aging gasoline engine, where wear is spread unevenly through many critical mechanical parts, battery degradation is often predictable and measurable. A serious buyer can ask for recent performance data or a health report. A seller can point to a documented replacement or upgrade. In markets where electric outboards have taken hold, a clean, well-kept electric system with documented battery history can hold value in a way that surprises people used to watching gasoline engines fall off a cliff in their second decade. A buyer may see a clear path, run the existing pack for a few more mild seasons, then plan for a known replacement cost that will effectively reset the propulsion system for many more years. Resale is not just about money recovered at the end. It is about how much uncertainty you are willing to inherit or pass along. Gasoline. Engines hide their remaining life behind compression numbers and oil analysis. Electric systems, especially those with transparent logging and modular battery design, have far fewer places for trouble to hide. That does not eliminate risk. It shifts it into a form you can often see coming sooner, which is a nuance rarely captured in simple charts of upfront price versus advertised range. Bringing it together, and the chapter this story is quietly setting up. When you sweep aside nostalgia for two-stroke smoke at sunrise, brand loyalties passed down through families, and the instinctive skepticism that anything electric must be either fragile or overhyped, the comparison between electric outboards and gasoline outboards comes down to a handful of grounded, observable truths. They are not dramatic, and they rarely show up in marketing, but they shape real ownership far more than spec sheets do. Electric outboards ask for more on the day you buy them, especially once you factor in the battery bank that turns them from a novelty into a true primary engine. But what they give back is spread across years of use. No fuel dock detours, no oil changes, no carburetor cleanings, almost no vibration, and very few of the mechanical surprises that ruin planned weekends. in the calm lakes and protected rivers where a huge portion of recreational boats spend their entire lives. The range of a modern electric system already matches the distances people actually travel, not the hypothetical journeys they picture when daydreaming about faraway coves. Gasoline outboards, for their part, still hold ground where energy demands are extreme. Offshore runs that require long stretches at high speed, guiding operations in remote regions with no reliable power, and commercial roles where refueling in minutes is essential. These are arenas where gasoline remains the rational, proven choice. The infrastructure supporting gasoline engines is deep, from parts warehouses to mobile mechanics. Their behavior under heavy loads and in harsh conditions is well understood. And for owners who live in those worlds, the familiar compromises still make sense. Better and cheaper are not absolute labels. They only gain meaning when you attach them to real habits. How far you run, how often you launch, whether your boat is a working platform or a quiet escape, and how much a lost Saturday or canceled trip actually costs you in frustration or money. A boat that runs short loops every weekend is living a completely different life from one that must cross open water on a schedule. Right now, across marinas and storage yards, repowers are happening for reasons that never show up in glossy brochures. Some owners are stepping into electric not because their hulls are tired, but because the fuel bills, the maintenance, and the guesswork have begun to feel like an invisible tax on every season. Others hold on to gasoline because their roots, their work, or their isolation still sit just outside what electric can comfortably deliver. And in that quiet divide, those practical choices made boat by boat, dock by dock, the next chapter of this transition is already taking shape. If you have questions about your own setup or a situation you are trying to untangle, drop them in the comments and I will try to cover them in a future chapter. And if you found this breakdown useful, tap like and subscribe. It helps this series reach the boaters who are asking the same questions you are.